Okay, and we're ready. So, let me tell you guys about the stream. And, well, the stream exactly as its title says. We're just going to see what is happening in the world. And we're going to go through like geopolitics, what's happening, like just weird stuff, horror stuff, anything in general. And I'm just going to give my reactions to it. So, let's get started. Also, let me switch this there, and let me take this. Hmm, it won't do it. It's whatever. Okay, let me go that to there. That, that. Okay, it's just so I can see chat easier. But let's get to it. And for our first thing up, we're watching Iran deal with an ex-NATO commander. This is bad news.
The U.S. and Iran have reached a framework to end the fighting. A signing is set for this Friday, and what needs to be worked out before then, what they're actually agreeing to, in what timeline, and what's left to be worked out is a very big question. Joining me right now is CNN senior military analyst, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander, Admiral James Stavridis. It's good to have you here on a day where there's some answers and a lot more questions. Admiral, can you characterize this moment for us in your mind? Like, how
Oh
close?
yeah, for the people that don't know, well, they probably should know, but the U.S., as in Donald Trump and his gang, decided to bomb Iran and then seek a peace deal, skipping over several well weeks or even months of uh that going on. But now they're trying to seek a exit plan, and they're supposedly meeting in Switzerland with Pakistan being the major broker of the peace deal as a third party helping to negotiate. And it really does seem like we gained a whole lot of nothing. Like this entire war was a nothing burger.
Are they to ending the war, do you think?
I think it's like a car kind of chugging down the highway. It's been moving in this direction, Kate. You and I have discussed it over the last couple of months. We always kind of felt there was a 65% chance we'd get to an agreement. Here we are. So car is chugging along.
I mean, to be fair, let's be honest with ourselves. The US has to take a deal. Not it's not really about Iran no more. It's because Donald Trump was looking at a few videos and like news before this, but like he is losing a lot of support because of what he's doing. And even if the US pulls out of the Iran war, we're talking about like damages to their global projection of power, especially in the Middle East with the Saudi Arabian allies, as they just as like Saudi Arabia just goes like, "What the fuck, man? You're supposed to protect us from this exact situation that everyone knew was gonna happen. Everyone knew this was gonna happen." But Donald Trump, being like a certified dumbass, decided that it was in his best interest and the best interest of Israel to do an attack on Iran or Iran. I mean, does pronunciation matter in this context? But moving forward, like after this, people really don't expect the U.S. to project power in the Middle East. Like, like they can still do it, but not as much as before. Never as much as before.
Here's the bad news. There's a lot of sand in the gears. You
Mm.
mentioned a couple of them, but tactically, I'll add another one, which is the mines. How many mines are in the strait? When do they get cleared? Who is going to clear them? Are there going to be escorts for those ships? Those are tactical concerns, very real, believe me, to the mariners who are going to be asked to sail through the straits. And then, secondly, operationally, as you mentioned, it's Israel, Lebanon, Hezbollah, that deadly triangle, very much unfinished business, certainly in the minds of the Israelis. So that's operational. And then strategically, it's the nuclear material, as President Trump calls it, the nuclear dust. It's hardly dust. It's 1,000 pounds of highly enriched uranium, and there's no clear path to get that out of the country. So Carr is still chugging, finish line ahead of us. Will we get there? I still think it's a 2 and 3 chance, but a lot of sand in the gears.
Let's go back to the tactical, because I was going to ask you, I was kind of in my mind thinking of it as like logistics, like how challenging, or maybe think of it this way, how quickly can the Strait of Hormuz truly reopen safely and fully to give the confidence, not just in statements, but just to give the confidence of the companies and the shippers and the people who are going to be traveling through the strait that they can?
We say in the military, and you put your finger on it, the amateurs are talking about all the war fighting and the missiles. The professionals are talking about logistics, meaning your point, we've got to clear the strait to a level of confidence for these mariners. As you know, I've been through this strait close to 100 times. And it's tough navigation without all the missiles and the mines and the small boats. So to answer the question, I think it's probably not months and months, but it's certainly weeks and weeks. Here's something to watch. The president is about to land for the G7 in Europe. Can he get the Europeans on task here? I hope so. Europe ought to step up and participate.
Honestly, I don't believe Europe should step up in this. Like, I'm gonna disagree with him on that point. Most likely, Europe wasn't told, which many of them say they weren't. And let's be honest, they would have told the US to not fight this war. They would have told Trump to not fight this. France, UK, Germany, Spain, the NATO country shouldn't have to do anything because this is a US war. And even you can attack the nuclear point, yes, but even then they weren't they weren't gonna build the bomb, and they're gonna get the same deal as they got from the Obama administration. So it's pointless. The entire thing was pointless. More about market speculation than anything.
Participate with the U.S. in at least this phase of the operation. I think they will. Look for European minesweepers to help do that. It'll still take weeks before those mariners are fully confident in the strait.
This gets to another piece I wanted to ask you about. There's an aspect of the interview the president did with David Sanger of the New York Times over the weekend that I wanted to read. He wrote this in part about his conversation with President Trump. Speaking on his 80th birthday, as his family could be heard gathering in the background for a celebratory dinner, he, the president, praised two authoritarians, President Xi Jinping of China and Vladimir Putin of Russia, for aiding in the settlement, or at least not interfering in the blockade of the strait. You read that, and then with in mind what you just said, that the president is about to arrive in France to meet with the G7, and it's just how much this Iran war has impacted or maybe reshaped the relationship with traditional U.S. allies.
Indeed, it has, and not in good ways. And it's driven a kind of wedge between the two sides of NATO. You can feel that transatlantic bridge kind of creaking at the moment. So my message to the Europeans is here's an opportunity to show Putin and to show Xi that we, the West, can come together, can fulfill this mission together.
I mean, yeah, but isn't like I forgot what it's called, but it's the Russian one, like TTSO, if I remember it. Uh, uh, Russia. CSTO, yeah. So a bunch of countries in that, like, they are breaking up actually. 100% within like 5 more years, it's not gonna exist. I'm gonna bet on that. Don't believe me. Um, but yeah, it's just like a lot of this might be a time where a bunch of new alliances might be formed because apparently the U.S. has a crack job for a president, and then Russia is dying to Ukraine deadly backshots, and like it's like the two most superpowers are not really that super.
I think it's an important moment for Europe in
And
that
like, yes, I'm a U.S. citizen and I glaze the U.S. all the time, but not here, not here, and not like this.
regard. And then finally, just a spot of good news is that this is bad news for Vladimir Putin because as oil prices come down, he has less money to finance his illegal.
I mean, yes, yes, but the even bigger thing on his side is he's running out of people, and for Russia, that's saying something. Like, like their entire doctrine is like human wall, and like they're losing people. So I don't like. Sure, he makes money off of that, but he's losing money. He's gonna have to start pulling population from the cities, which is gonna tank his approval rating, and it's really just gonna get people to like boo him.
Immoral violation of international law war in Ukraine.
I'm going to bring in CNN Global Affairs commentator and former Deputy Pentagon Press Secretary Sabrina Singh. So, Sabrina, good morning. Thank you for being here.
Okay, this is kind of like fucked up, but she has a large nose,
First, I want to just talk about the
like
latest Iran
certified
saying,
sniffer.
look, we're not doing anything until
Oh, no, I
money
shouldn't be
is
saying anything. My fault.
unfrozen, and then the U.S. disputing that. Here's the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Mike Waltz, speaking on Sunday. We'll talk on the other side of that.
The Iranians are incredibly difficult negotiators, coupled with the fact that they're having a very hard time getting guidance
He looks like he hasn't slept.
from their
Very
supreme leader,
strong.
and they're not always on the same page within their team between the civilians and military. So, the team has had their hands full dealing with them, but the president has every intent to get this done.
He sort of nodded to something I think that maybe people don't fully appreciate, which is that Iran's regime is pretty much in place, even as though a tier of leadership was killed in these strikes. So answer the question that he's raising here of like negotiation, the money, what are the complications?
The complications here is that Iran is very skilled at negotiating, and this regime in particular is more hardline than the previous regime. I mean, they are willing to incur the costs and the military strikes that the U.S. and Israel have conducted over, we've seen, a significant amount of time. I think what's interesting about this memorandum of understanding or this new agreement is it's only there to open the straits. It does not address the thorniest issues which we know Iran is really going to drag its feet on, which are its nuclear program and the highly enriched uranium that is still.
I mean, of course, it's gonna drag his feet. Like, like, like we had this. We already had a good deal when Obama gave the nuclear treaty to Iran, and Trump being Trump, he hates Obama. He doesn't like Biden. He just couldn't have it. Like this world war seems like purely out of ego and like just Israel's interest.
Sitting in Iran. And so while this agreement basically tries to restore the status to pre-war status, it still doesn't address those nuclear agreements. And Iran, like Mike Walls was saying, Iran knows how to play the game to draw the United States out. If we're talking about negotiating at minimum within 60 days, that is bringing us up right up to the midterms. And I think Iran knows that the United States is not going to want to start up kinetic action
Bingo.
right before the midterms, right before voting starts in
Two
November.
military questions. One, when we say the strait is opening, does that mean that Iran just backs down, the U.S. backs down? Are there mines in the strait? Like, are there still dangers there?
I think both sides could say today that the strait is open and that they're clearing the mines from the strait. But the only ones that are going to determine if the strait is open are the shipping companies. Are they willing to allow their ships to start going through the strait and potentially incurring costs if, let's say, a drone is launched from Iran or there's crossfire between the two sides? So even though Donald Trump is saying on Friday the strait is open, it is still
We won't know until ships pass through.
Exactly.
Last thing militarily, Israel.
Yeah.
Israel, we're going to talk about in this program, across the political spectrum, unhappy with this deal, and in part because of military reasons. They say it doesn't address their issues around proxies that Iran backs, like Hezbollah. It doesn't even talk about ballistic missiles. That's not even in the conversation around the Memorandum of Understanding, at least so far. This is kind of the same criticism that the Obama deal had.
I mean, you might not have agreed.
I mean, yeah, but again, they could have used the Obama deal to sign a new deal without bombing people. Like the 100% without bombing people.
With the JCPOA, but that was something under the Obama administration, but that was something that took almost 2 years to negotiate. Now, with Israel, what's interesting about this agreement that this administration has negotiated, Israel is not party to the agreement. And they have said, I mean, I think as early as this morning, that they might continue to conduct operations in Lebanon. So between now and Friday, things could get derailed very quickly. I think President Trump, he wanted to win on his birthday, which he got this agreement. And he also wanted to walk into the G7 with saying, hey, this war is coming to an end. European partners, now it's time to do your part and help us clear that
Can he do
strait.
that if Israel has seized an amount of land that's like around the size of New York City,
Right.
And says it's going to continue its battle against Hezbollah?
I think it's going to be very difficult if Israel continues to conduct military operations for Iran to agree to terms with the United States when it's going to say to the United States, this is also an aggressor in this war that also struck our country. You need to pull them back. And that's why you saw the president sort of react in some of these interviews that he was giving on Sunday saying, you know, what is Bibi doing? Because he
Fair. Let's see. Did they do anything else? Okay. Back then there is there. Let's do this one real
President
quick.
Trump has in the last few moments just arrived at the site of the G7 summit you see there in France. That's Hotel Royal in Evian, of course. These moments, just video from the last few moments, of course, the importance of this meeting as he meets with G7 leaders is critical. And it comes just, hours, of course, since we've seen that diplomatic breakthrough in the war between the United States and Iran. The agreement has been reached, as we heard from the president. Many leaders will be there, I'm sure, applauding that agreement. It's not a deal so far, of course. That's expected over the weekend. In fact, in the last few moments, we did hear that from Vice President J.D. Vance saying that the goal is to release the exact text with the agreement with Iran sometime in the coming days. But it's not a deal yet. It has not been signed. And many questions still remain about exactly what is in this agreement. President Trump, as you're looking at these live pictures from Evian in France, is there, of course, for the G7. And the focus will be not just on Ukraine, but also on what has happened with Iran. The potential deal would be to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, end the U.S. blockade on Iranian ports, and serve as a framework for future negotiations. But the details are vague, as I was saying. No text has been released, although J.D. Vance is saying that can come in the coming days. And already we are seeing what could be significant gaps between the United States, Israel, and Iran. Let me give you what sense of what Iran is saying. They say that talks would hinge on the U.S. meeting certain commitments, and that includes the release of billions of dollars of frozen Iranian funds, something Washington, we know, rejects. Iran also says it will collect fees for ships passing through the Strait of Hormuz after Trump said there will be
Fees? Bro, are they like the mafia, like protection fees?
no tolls. And then there's the other element of that, and that is Lebanon. Iran says the proposal must include an end to the conflict there, but Israel says it will not withdraw from southern Lebanon. Our senior international correspondent Melissa Bell is in Evian in France, the site of the G7 summit, the site, of course, where we've seen President Trump just arriving. Our Jeremy Diamonds, you can see there, is in Tel Aviv. I do want to begin, though, with Melissa. So, Melissa, give us a sense of how much of this framework we front and center. I know that some of the leaders have already been commenting on this. Some of them, of course, who were not on board with this war in Iran. How will this be received? How is it being received by many of the leaders there?
There's a great deal of hope, a great deal more than there was, but there is also a great deal of caution in how they're expressing that hope. And of course, remember that
I mean, as many times as this president said this war was over, I take it with a grain of salt the size of Pluto. There's like, it's hope. Yes, it's hope that they're coming together. But again, I think this is just going to be another nothing burger.
none of the other G7 leaders who are to meet with President Trump have seen any of the text of this. It's really unclear what is inside it, or indeed how we get through to Friday with all the potential there is for this thing to be derailed and get to that signing ceremony without any major issue occurring. Still, G7 leaders, remember, they've had a difficult relationship, the counterparts of President Trump within this group over the course of the last few months, and specifically on this issue. So the fact that he arrives with this memorandum of understanding digitally signed and in his pocket at least, and pleased that he is able to do so given all of the tensions there have been over what he's felt is the lack of cooperation he's had from leaders of the G7 and European leaders on this issue and in trying to force open the
I mean, but like, didn't he say that he didn't need European assistance? I'm pretty sure I'm correct on that. I'm pretty sure we're correct. Yes, Donald Trump especially stated that the United States did not need European assistance while he called on NATO allies to help secure the Strait of Hormuz during the Iran war. He simultaneously insisted that the US military can handle the conflict on its own. Now that's a brain racker because I don't I wouldn't go to my mom, say I don't need your help anymore, I'm gonna live on my own. Then like say that I got it all on my own and like constantly like I don't want to say berate her, but like something along those lines. And then like 2 seconds later, go and say like, I need your help. Why are you not helping me? You're my mom. It's like, bro, what is we doing? Like, what are we doing?
Strait of Hormuz, that sense of satisfaction with which he'll be arriving could go a great way to helping this G7 go rather better than did the last one. You'll remember that it was the G7 in Canada that he'd stormed out of early. The French presidency.
When is our president not storming out of somewhere just because he doesn't like the words? I mean, let's be honest.
Really doing everything to ensure that this time President Trump stays. Now, Iran was always going to be central to these talks. There are the leaders of Egypt, Qatar, and the UAE who are due here tomorrow to take part in those discussions. Still, with these latest breakthrough, that is going to be much more central to these discussions than it was going to be even before. What you've heard from European leaders, Issa, is this willingness to come and step in and now be involved in these peace negotiations, take a greater part within them. We've been hearing that from the EU's top diplomats, Kaja Kallas. We've also been hearing from the French presidency itself that the military assets that are involved in the global but Franco-British-led initiative to keep navigation open on the Strait of Hormuz once hostilities have ended, those military assets, says President Macron, are in place. All we need now is for those hostilities to cease. So there is hope that this might be the beginning of something, and clearly for the rest of the G7,
I mean, hope is a strong word, but yes, it is there. But again, I'm taking this with a massive grain of salt.
desperate need that this thing is brought to an end, if only for the economic problems that it has brought them, Issa.
Indeed, and there have been numerous, of course.
CNN's Elena Trinas in Geneva, where Air Force One touched down just a little while ago. Elena, just a short time ago, the president posted that ships are starting to move out of the Strait of Hormuz. What else can you tell us?
Yeah, that's right. The president eager to tout, I think, what is this new agreement between the United States and Iran at a time, of course, when he is about to meet with several European leaders, many of whom, Wolf, that he had clashed with openly regarding this war, and specifically what he argued was their refusal to help the United States in reopening the Strait of Hormuz. I do want to note we are actually just seeing images now of the president arriving in Evian-le-Bain, getting out of his motorcade and greeting some of the people there in France. But to get back to what we were hearing about this agreement, I think there are a lot of questions, many I have included, that I've been going to my sources about what exactly this agreement looks like. We have not yet seen the text. We did hear the Vice President, J.D. Vance, say this morning that he's hoping that they can release the text this week. But what we do know, isn't it, Wolf, is one, really this desire to dismantle Iran's.
Okay, I'm gonna say this. I'm willing to bet, a significant amount of imaginary money that Israel is gonna sabotage the peace deals. I'm just saying. They're gonna attack Lebanon again, or like something along those lines, and we're right back to where we started. Because I'm not really thinking I don't want to say Israel itself just started everything, but it low-key did. And matter of factly, I think while watching a few other videos and tying in their ideas, that Israel is betting a lot on this expansion and calling in the US to help fight this war for them. And they miscalculated how much was needed.
Nuclear program, that was always going to be a key provision of this. They also say that in the agreement, and this is according to U.S. officials, in the agreement is a provision to allow the United States to go in to retrieve the highly enriched uranium still in Iran's possession and to destroy it on site. Then also there's these big questions about the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz and when that will happen. We did hear the president argue yesterday that it would be reopened following the signing ceremony on Friday here in Geneva. But Vance, when speaking this morning with CNBC, argued that whether or not it will actually be a toll-free Strait of Hormuz, that's going to be part of negotiations down the line. Listen to how he said it.
Well, our expectation is that the strait is going to be opened in a toll-free way for the long term, and that's the sort.
Wait, wasn't it toll-free before though? Was so we're getting the same deal we had. What are these people doing? What are we actually doing, bro? Like how? You're getting the same things we had previously.
Sort of thing that we're going to figure out in these technical negotiations. You know, that there are a lot of very important details to figure out that we're actually going to sit at the table and discuss together and figure out a path forward on these details.
Yeah, so look, as you heard there from Vance, far less forthright than what we have heard really from the president insisting that there will be no tolls on the strait moving forward. Vance, as you heard him say there, saying that this is going to be part of those highly technical talks that take place in that 60-day period following the signing, where they're really going to have to talk about the specifics of how to implement the deal, of how to go in and retrieve and destroy that highly enriched uranium, about how to make sure that there are the right enforcement mechanisms in place. All of that still to come down the line. But again, I think, from the conversations what I've been having with officials, they really do argue that this is something the president wanted. He wanted to head into this G7 summit with a victory in hand and the Iran war, and that's how they are likely going to be framing it, even as there are many questions that persist about the timing of when this is going to be implemented, questions about monetary compensation, something Iranians said needs to be, funds unfrozen need to be happening before those 60-day talks can take place. Hearing different things from the U.S. arguing that there will be no monetary compensation for.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, this was a nothing burger of a century. What, like, this was the most useless war I have ever seen since Ukraine. Like, just purely nothing. And now we're watching hold up, give me a second. And then now we're watching North Korea's economy is booming by TDLR News Global.
Every 5 years, North Korea holds a Workers' Party Congress. At the one before last in 2021, Kim Jong-un was a sorry sight. The economy was a mess. COVID was sweeping across the country, and things were so bad that Kim was forced to tearfully apologise for his failures. At the most recent one earlier this year, however, the vibes were very different. Kim triumphantly declared that North Korea was in a glorious and more prosperous era, promising, quote, both sweets and bullets, with the implication being that North Korea
That's a saying I have never heard.
Korea's economy is doing well enough to both provide for its people and fund its nuke-centric military program. So in this video, we're going to look at the North Korean economy and why it's apparently doing all right. Trump has launched so many military interventions, North Korea's growth rates began to slow.
I'm gonna just skip over that part.
This was in part thanks to copious amounts of aid from its communist allies, China and the Soviet Union, which was then channeled into a Soviet-style command economy centered around heavy industry. According to CIA estimates, by 1960, North Korea was, on a per capita basis, substantially wealthier than its southern neighbour. However, North Korea's growth rates began to slow in the 1960s. This was in part because North Korea's first leader, Kim Il-sung, aligned himself with China after the Sino-Soviet split, prompting a steep reduction in Soviet aid. But it was also because Kim really doubled down on his policy of juche, or self-reliance, and minimized trade with the outside world. Many socialist/communist states pursued similar policies, but none to the same degree as North Korea, which even pulled back from the Soviet-led Comecon trade bloc. Somewhat unsurprisingly, this didn't work.
Comecon? Like, the anime convention? That one?
And in the 1970s,
Listen, if you know ball, you get the oversimplified joke.
North Korea started borrowing heavily on international markets in order to import advanced machinery, which it couldn't produce domestically. But exports remained weak, and whatever foreign currency North Korea could accumulate was mostly spent on energy imports, especially after the 1973 oil crisis, leading to a series of defaults in the mid-1970s.
I mean, we're probably going to have that same oil crisis now.
The country didn't really have a financial sector, so to speak, so it didn't experience the sort of financial crisis that sovereign defaults usually engender. But this did mean that North Korea could no longer borrow on international markets, which limited its access to foreign imports and effectively pushed the country back towards autarky. This is when the gap between North and South Korea really started to open up. But things then got even worse with the collapse of the Soviet Union around 1990, which put an end to both direct Soviet aid and subsidized Soviet oil. This triggered a severe economic crisis culminating in an appalling famine. Out of a total population of 22 million, somewhere between 300,000 and 3 million people starved to death, with millions more suffering from acute malnutrition. The state receded in this period because it literally lacked the resources to monitor and command the economy. And as the economy began to recover in the 2000s, an informal market-based economy expanded in its place. This was also when the Chinese economy was really taking off, which was good news for North Korea, given China is basically the only country it trades with. North Korea doesn't publish its own GDP
Right.
figures, but estimates from the South Korean Central Bank, the Bank of Korea, suggest that the North Korean economy posted solid GDP growth throughout the early 2000s. However, growth rates slowed in the late 2000s, largely due to gradually escalating UN sanctions after North Korea's first nuclear test in 2006. Growth
That soon? 2006. That's 2 years before I was born. Huh. I mean, history has a way of messing with your time perception on things.
rates then crazy.
You really think, like, let's be honest, most of recent history has happened in like in the last 50 years. Like most of the damning things that we're gonna go up against happened in like the last 50 years. I mean, like slavery was like 100. So it's like yeah, yeah, it's weird.
In the mid 2010s, in large part because China, which had previously helped water down any UN level sanctions, agreed to substantially stronger sanctions in 2016 and 2017. This meant that the North Korean economy was already in a bit of a state going into the pandemic, which proved utterly ruinous. Trade with China collapsed, taking the economy with it. Deprived of fertilizer and hit by severe typhoons, domestic crop production plummeted, creating
Ooh.
widespread food insecurity. North Korea's public health system was, unsurprisingly, unable to cope with the wave of infections that swept through the population. It was such a disaster that, at the Party Congress in January 2021, Kim was forced into an utterly unprecedented teary-eyed apology on national television. However, in the years since, the North Korean economy has seemingly roared back to health, with the Bank of Korea estimating more than 3% GDP growth every year since 2023. This is plausibly an underestimate as well. Since the expansion of the informal economy in the 2000s, a gap has opened up between the Bank of Korea's GDP estimates and the growth in nighttime light activity, which economists generally consider to be a pretty good proxy for GDP, suggesting the Bank of Korea might actually be understating North Korea's real growth rates.
Ooh.
Similarly, more recent nighttime light data from Pyongyang specifically suggest that capital's luminosity has essentially doubled since the pandemic. Kim has also announced the completion of some big-ticket infrastructure projects recently, including, last month, a number of long-delayed hydroelectric power plants, which have historically accounted for the majority of North Korea's power output. It's obviously not hard data, but foreigners who visited the capital, Pyongyang, claim that the city is noticeably more developed than it was only a few years ago. So, what's gone right? Well, we see at least 3 reasons. First, Russia. North Korea has provided arms, troops, and even construction workers to help Russia during its war against Ukraine, which has proved
Okay.
incredibly lucrative for the regime and provided Kim with a much needed source of foreign currency. Second, China. China is no longer enforcing UN sanctions as stringently as it did in the late 2010s, and trade between the countries has duly boomed, which has helped the North Korean economy benefit from what we might describe as spillover effects from China's ongoing economic growth. North Korea has also benefited from what Western policymakers describe as China's overcapacity, which has allowed it to import Chinese solar panels and electric cars at rock-bottom prices. Third, sanctions. Not only are the UN sanctions not being enforced properly, the non-UN sanctions, coordinated mostly by the US and its allies, have also become less effective over time. This is part of a more general story. As the US has imposed sanctions with increasing frequency, the rest of the world has created more and more workarounds to insulate themselves, hence their waning efficacy. Now, of course, it's important not to overstate this. North Korea still has, in dollar terms, a GDP per capita in the low thousands. It's also worth noting that, while Pyongyang might look all right to tourists, the rest of the country is a lot poorer. Nonetheless, as the change in tone between the 2 most recent party congresses made clear, it's at least true that the economy is doing a lot better than it was, and this is probably bad news for anyone who doesn't want an emboldened North Korea. When a story like this breaks, the headlines aren't just fast, they're fragmented. Depending on where you get your news, you might be seeing a completely different...
Okay, let's go on to the next video. And here we have, give it a second, Crimea plunged into darkness. Ukraine cuts off all its power by business basics. You know, they're called business basics, but they don't really talk about much business stuff.
2 days ago, Vladimir Putin signed a law that lets the Russian government seize the property of any citizen who criticizes the war.
What?
And then yesterday,
That can't be true. Oh, what? Uh, mm, how do you spell seed? Any of a person that uh, Vladimir Putin signed legislation expanding the government's ability to seize properties and banks accounts of citizens who speak out against war in Ukraine or otherwise challenge officials. Well, I'll be damned. He did. Crazy times we're living in. We're honest.
he used a similar power to confiscate $7 billion, not rubles but dollars, from one of his own billionaires. This was the single largest nationalization in Russian history. The reason Putin had to do something so drastic is actually sitting in plain sight all across his own country. Moscow is rationing gasoline. Crimea is in a literal blackout. And guess what? His own oil production has fallen for 6 straight months. The situation is getting so bad that Russian parliament members are now publicly naming Russian elites as the problem behind all of this. So in this video, I want to walk you through what is actually happening inside Russia right now. The cities are turning night into day from refinery fires, and then other cities are literally turning night into permanent
the Ukraine is just like low-key just going in on them.
darkness from blackouts. Truck drivers who are delivering supplies to the front lines are being told to abandon their loads and dive into ditches to save their lives. Car drivers inside of Moscow are being limited to just 5 gallons of gasoline per person. And Russian MPs, as we just talked about, are now standing up to Putin and calling out his hypocrisy. By the end of this video, you'll understand why a $7 billion seizure is just a sign of what's about to come for Russia. So let's start with the part of Russia that's literally...
They've been on their downfall for a while now. If we're honest, they've been on that downfall.
in darkness right now. Because while Putin was hosting his economic forum in St. Petersburg, an entire region of his so-called country was sitting in darkness waiting for lights to come back. This is Simferopol. It's the largest city in southern Crimea. And last week, a Ukrainian drone strike hit the city's main thermal power plant. The result is what you're looking at right now. Extended blackouts across the entire city. You can actually see the moment plants got hit. Take a look. That bright flash is the thermal station going up in flames. And the next morning, we can actually see smoke was still rising into the sky. It burned for hours, maybe even multiple days. Now, this was not a one-off strike. This was an extended strike that caused multiple explosions across the city and in the nearby area. A military airfield in a nearby city also got hit, and we'll get to other parts of Russia that were also hit in this exact assault. But for now, I really want to explain how bad the situation inside of Crimea is truly getting. Remember, this is the price that Putin annexed in 2014 to save his political career. And now the peninsula is slowly descending into darkness. As we talked about in our last video, gas pumps inside of Crimea are running dry. And now that problem is spreading to Russia. In fact,
I had to push a few cars in my life, and it's so bad. Especially if you're pushing it alone. Or uphill. I feel bad for that guy.
Just this morning, news came out that two of the largest cities in Russia, Moscow and St. Petersburg, are experiencing same problems. Take a look at this report. According to this, Moscow, St. Petersburg, and Kazan have all introduced gasoline restrictions this week. Drivers are only allowed to fill up now up to 20 liters.
Okay. How is Russia facing gasoline problems. They're a petrol state.
That's roughly 5 gallons, a
I
little
mean,
bit more
same
than
thing
that.
with the U.S. too. As like, if you want to go somewhere expensive, just go to a gas station. I seen $5 a gallon. No, I seen $6 a gallon at one point. Like, damn.
And that's actually insane if you think about it, because Russia has the second largest proven oil reserves on the entire planet. Maybe second or
Exactly.
third largest. So clearly they have a lot of oil. But unfortunately, because of Ukrainian long range sanctions, aka Ukrainian drones, Russia cannot produce oil, and that's why even
Oh,
Russian
okay.
citizens are suffering, not just the Russian government's
I guess
budget.
this
I
is why
can't
being at war is
overstate how
bad.
much of a shock this is for ordinary Russians who have never experienced anything like this before. In fact, we have people in Moscow who are vlogging this situation because they couldn't believe this is true news. So they're going to gas stations trying to find out for themselves if there's a limit. Take a look.
Right, mates. Hello, everyone. St. Petersburg here. A friend wrote saying we now have a petrol limit of 20 liters per car. So I've just pulled up to a Tatneft to check if it's actually true. Hello. It's prepay only today. First to the till, then you
Prepay?
fill up. And on the amount, 20 liters maximum? Yes, understood everything. There you go, mates. In the end, it's 20 liters, sadly.
This is because Russian oil production has fallen for 6 months in a row now. And this is
Damn.
despite the fact that oil prices are a bit more elevated than they were before the Iran war. So you would think that Russia has a higher incentive to
Loki, I thought they would be raking in the cash though. Like straight balls to the walls with the oil production, but no.
increase the production so they can sell the oil on the open market to any country that needs it, and they can make up the shortfall in their budget. But they are trying to do that, by the way, but they cannot do that physically, literally, because of Ukrainian strikes. Ukraine has been hitting Russian storage, Ukraine has been hitting Russian tankers, and Ukraine has been hitting Russian refineries. And because of that, even though Russia wants to produce more, they actually cannot produce more, and that's now causing problem domestically. Because that's also another important part of this, that Russia always puts the domestic supply first, and then the excess gets exported out. That's why over the last 3 years, we have regularly seen Russian government put in export controls on certain types of gasoline, because they want to serve the domestic market before that oil goes to the international market where they can make a profit. But now, since the production is falling for such a long time, even domestic supply is facing disruptions. Now, of course, as we have covered before, Ukraine isn't just going after Russian refineries, they're also now going after Russian logistics. Basically convoys and trucks that supply Russian regions, occupied Russian regions, and Russian troops on the front lines. This is Operation Logistical Lockdown, and we actually have a clip of how this is actually operating. It's truly terrifying. Take a look. What you're looking at right now is a Russian logistics highway. This is the kind of road that carries fuel convoys, ammunition trucks to the front lines and to other regions. And that drone in the sky, well, that's a Ukrainian reconnaissance drone just looking for targets. Strikes like these are happening every few minutes across multiple different highways. Doesn't matter if it's day or night. That means Russia's entire supply chain is being hunted in real time. And the Kremlin has now
That's
publicly
what
admitted that
hold
they
up.
can't really do anything to
Like honestly, that's low-key scary. Like a drone just zipping past your head, and like if it deems you a worthy target, you just die.
stop it. We know this because there's now a guide that Russian media is publishing for truck drivers as to what they have to do if they see a drone like this. And take a look. Russian state media states that instructions here are pretty simple. If you see a drone, do not try to fight. Do not call for help. Do not stay in your truck. Just park the truck on the side of the road, jump out, and run into a ditch and hide. Kremlin is basically saying that, hey, Ukrainians are going after trucks, and at the end of the day, you are responsible for your own life, so you should put that first.
Ooh.
And that's why drivers are being told, as soon as you see a drone, just leave the truck and hide, save yourself. Which is a bit surprising personally for me, because considering how many casualties Russia has suffered, you would think that Russia
Yep,
doesn't care about
exactly.
their own citizens' lives. But then again, this is coming from
I mean, they care about the demographic of their citizens' lives. If it's from like a poorer, like eastern region, oh, they don't care. Send them to the front.
from like war bloggers and stuff. So I'm sure these people care about other citizens' lives. It's Putin who doesn't care about it. And that's why Putin doesn't really care how many people die on the front lines. But anyways, this all brings us to the main problem that Russia has been facing for the past couple of weeks. And that's the chokehold around Crimea that's tightening every single day.
Yep.
Crimea has multiple different choke points that Ukraine can target, and it creates an outsized impact as to how much supplies can go into Crimea. Take a look at this map. There are exactly 3 connection points between mainland Russian occupied territory and Crimea, of course, northern Crimea. Now, we already talked about the famous Kerch Bridge that's still there, but these are the 3 points that connect the land bridge. And Ukraine has been targeting all 3 of those bridges on a very regular basis. The Kongar Bridge has already been hit twice. This is something we covered in our last video. The bridge is not destroyed, but it's damaged so badly that until repairs take place, the bridge is closed down. So no one can actually use it, which is a positive for Ukraine. And then we have another bridge that has also been damaged, and because of that, it is closed down, but the damage is not as extensive as the Kongar Bridge. And the third bridge has been damaged, and because of that, the traffic is limited. Even though it's being used, it's not at the same level as it was before, which is a problem considering that the flow from other 2 bridges have stopped already. Now, the reason this is becoming a long-term problem is because Ukraine just continuously targets the bridge as soon as Russia repairs it. And since Ukraine is also targeting air defense systems that Russia has all over the country, Russia is running out of ways to stop Ukrainian drones. And at the same time, Ukrainian drone production is going up very drastically. That's something I'll cover at the end of the video because it's very interesting how fast it's growing. It's growing faster than some of the AI companies that here in the United States that are still
I mean, I already know about that, so I
growing
probably
pretty
just
good.
skip over
Now,
that.
anyways, coming back to Crimea. A few days ago, we covered how a lot of luxurious Russian hotels in Crimea were offering this deal where, hey, if you buy a vacation package from this hotel, you would get extra fuel so you can drive back to Russia after.
What a low selling point. Like, what an actual low selling point.
Your vacation is over. And the reason they were offering this was because gas stations were running dry. So people were afraid to get into Crimea because they knew they would have a harder time driving back. So they were literally offering fuel as a luxurious add-on. Well, guess what? Despite that, it seems like the situation has continued to deteriorate. And now Russian bloggers or travel vloggers are talking about how maybe Crimea is not the best place for vacationing right now. Take a listen.
Should the resort season in Crimea be canceled?
It must be, so we don't have to run around panicking later, so we don't have to beg for negotiations or drag in scum from international humanitarian organizations to save people trapped there. Trapped in a war zone. To end up in Crimea this summer is to end up in a trap.
I mean, I wouldn't say like that, but he's not wrong. Most definitely not wrong.
Now, as if this wasn't a bad sign already, we actually have the Kremlin spokesperson publicly say that, hey, we are facing some problems, but don't worry, we have asked friendly nations for help. Now, we'll go through this list, the list of the nations that Russia has asked for help from, but nonetheless, take a listen to this statement.
Due to the constant terrorist attacks by the Kyiv regime in our regions, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has appealed to a number of friendly countries to provide fuel for humanitarian needs. We hope for understanding and a helping hand, which we also always extend to our friends.
Now, let's be realistic. The list is probably China, North Korea, maybe Iran. I don't think any of these countries can actually help Russia in this situation because let's go through them one by one. China is already buying less oil than it was buying before because of the Iran war. They're not able to get the regular supply that they depended on from the Strait of Hormuz. I doubt China has excess oil supply that they can divert to Russia. Now, Iran, well, they're having similar problems. Because of the US blockade, they can't really export any more oil. I doubt they'll be able to help Russia in this situation. And of course, then we have North Korea. Country doesn't produce anything other than weapons. How are they going to help Russia with oil? So I feel like even though they're saying they're asking friendly countries for help, I don't think that help is going to come anytime soon. Now, because of all this, we're seeing something inside of Russia.
I mean, his help is low-key lackluster. Like, it's like calling up the Doom Squad.
That we haven't seen in roughly 30 years. We're seeing a Russian MP publicly call out the Kremlin for the failures that it's causing. Now, this is a long statement, but
I mean, looks like his plane's gonna have a few failures. I shouldn't say that. I mean, I guess.
Is a very important one, and it feels like a watershed moment in this war. So I want to read you guys the whole thing. Before that, just a quick reminder to hit the subscribe button down below. It truly does help us
You don't say. Please do hit that subscribe button.
out in getting this video to more and more people. Authorities recently held St. Petersburg International Forum. On the opening day of the forum, St. Petersburg oil terminal, one of the largest on the Baltic, was attacked. Yet, the arguments that had previously led to the cancellation of the Victory Day parade on May 9th were not deemed sufficient to cancel this forum. It appears the main purpose of such events is to demonstrate illusory well-being, behind which there are no visible real achievements other than the personal enrichment of the elites. Over the past year, numerous development programs and strategies have been drafted in Russia across all sectors of the economy. However, virtually none of them have been implemented. They have remained on paper and in declarations delivered from international nostrums. Instead of real action, we continue to face new prohibitions, restrictions, and a growing financial burden. By the way, we'll talk about financial burden in just a second, because the new laws being signed in Russia are truly insane. Like, truly insane. You can't imagine. This is basically the Soviet Union 2.0. Meanwhile, the pockets of government officials and affiliated elites remain far from empty. According to Forbes data of 2026, the size of the federal and more effectively than any aggressor. In 35 years, not a single successful reform has been carried out, while oligarchs
35 years? Damn. That's older than my mom. Wait, no. Older than both my sisters.
continue to multiply and grow rich. This is already in the 5th year of the special military operation. Now, again, as I said before, not a common occurrence in Russia, especially an MP signing his name on a letter like this, saying this publicly. This was not like a leaked private conversation like we saw at the start of the war. This is someone publicly putting this out, directly targeting the Kremlin. And guess what the Kremlin was doing at this time when the MP was basically saying, hey, it looks like the government is stealing from the people. Putin was signing a new law, basically making it legal for government officials to confiscate anything they want from a person who criticizes the regime. And then the very next day, this law gets used, a day after it's being signed.
Damn.
This week, Russia confiscated $7 billion in private assets from a single billionaire, the largest nationalization in Russian history. The official reason behind this confiscation? Well, apparently this billionaire was too corrupt for Putin's taste. But in reality, it's probably because he opposed the war. So now he's in prison, and his businesses, bank accounts, properties are all under state control. And I want to clarify, because I feel like there's some confusion every time we talk about a foreign country. A lot of great economic minds like Candace Owens and U.S. courts will not let the government just take over private property. There are very specific situations when the government can.
I'm gonna leave it off there, but that's crazy that happened. But let's continue this going. Actually, let me take a break real quick. And I'm gonna get some water, chill out a bit. I mean, and BRB. Okay, we are back, and I got myself some yogurt. Strawberry. I saw this for my little brother. I don't want to hear anything, but let me drink this real quick, and we get straight into it. Okay, I hope I don't have yogurt on my nose, but we are gonna watch how close were dinosaurs to a stone age. I just threw this in because I thought it'd be a fun video to watch. That's terrifying.
One, if not the most important period in human and hominin history, having been by far the longest lasting age for us modern humans and the Homo genus in general, as it started nearly 3.4 million years ago and lasted all the way to just 2000 BC, when it finally came to a close after
3.4 million years ago? Excuse me? I thought the Stone Age was like a few thousand years ago. Not like this. I can't get enough of the Gogurt. God damn it. Let's run that back
lasting
a
age
little
for us
bit.
modern humans and the Homo genus in general, as it started nearly
Okay. We got that. 3. Oh, I was thinking about like modern sapiens.
3.4 million years ago.
Not like all these other like different types of humans that clearly wasn't as good as us.
All the way to just 2000 BC, when it finally came to a close after the advent of metalwork. And while the Stone Age may seem primitive to you or I, it ultimately played a massive role in our development and was a key step in us ending up where we are now. In other words, no Stone Age, no iPad. So maybe that would have been a good thing.
I mean, honestly, the world could do without iPads. My little brother has one and just off the walls with it.
And while it's not a rule, many scientists believe that for any animal, the Stone Age of sorts is almost an unavoidable step to achieve greater technology, which is why so many people are interested in animals that have shown signs of entering their very own Stone Ages. And over the years, various researchers have reported that a few living animals have actually done this, such as chimpanzees, Burmese long-tailed macaques, and capuchin monkeys, with them all showing signs.
I mean, that is a genuine question I have. Like, is it like just using a stone? Let me look this up. Animal. Yes, scientists classify several non-human primates as being in their own Stone Age. Archaeological evidence shows that some species have been deliberately using stones as tools, such as hammer. Okay, so you just use a stone and you enter a Stone Age. Okay, it's not as close as I thought it would be. Like you just pick up a rock, use it, and then Stone Age.
Signs of using stone tools, most of the time to crack open stubborn food. But in the case of the capuchins, there is even evidence that this Stone Age behavior dates back all the way to 3,000 years ago, as stones bearing signs of repeated use have been found in the Cerrado Savannah, which date back to that time, and show that even thousands of years ago, these primates were using varying stone sizes and shapes to hammer and dig into their environment, leading some to wonder just how this will develop in the future. However, while it can seem like all these animals are just entering the Stone Age right now, you have to remember that life has been around for a hot minute. Which has made me wonder, at least, just how many different animals in the past reached the Stone Age before extinction got them. And of course, being the paleo nerd that I am, this also meant I was really...
I mean, I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm kind of less impressed since just picking up a stone puts you in a Stone Age. Like there should be like a little bit more nuance to it than picking up a stone, hammering it against a rock, and boom.
Wondering if the dinosaurs in particular have been in their very own Stone Age too. After all, this group did rule the Earth for over 160 million years, basically uninterrupted, and suffered relatively minor extinction events during the majority of their reign, and also evolved into
Me when I call it asteroid a minor extinction event. I mean, yeah, we'll recover eventually. It's just like the entire air is burning and I can't breathe. The trees are on fire. I mean, the lakes are burning, volcanoes are active, and it's just a minor extinction event. Nothing too major.
A mind-boggling different amount of species and families, which, to me at least, would have seemed to give them a pretty good shot at creating at least one genius over all these years. So again, this all begs the question, were dinosaurs ever in a Stone Age? And the answer is, drumroll please,
Probably not.
no.
Probably.
But that's a no with an asterisk. You see,
Huh?
throughout the history of paleontology, we have yet to stumble upon any strong evidence of tool usage amongst dinosaurs, no matter the group, place, or age. And as extension, no
So they're useless. I mean, not entirely useless. We still have the chicken,
stone
but
tools
useless.
attributed to them have been found either. And thus, going off of the fossil record, we can say that they never reached the Stone Age. Yet, the big caveat here is that this is the fossil record, and the fossil record is not exactly perfect at preservation. In fact, when it comes to
Fair.
animal bones, it's believed that less than 1 in a million are actually fossilized, and that's just bones. Meaning, there is a ton of stuff that existed that simply will never be found because of time. And therefore, no evidence of dinosaur tool use doesn't really
Yeah.
mean 100% that they didn't. And over the years, certain paleontologists have made arguments which would seem to suggest that dinosaurs were further along the technological tree than one might think. Now, granted, these arguments have tended to err on the side of controversial, but they still do make some pretty interesting points. You see, not all dinosaurs were made the same, and when it came to intelligence,
Fair.
the differences here are about as extreme as their diversity. When it comes to brain to body size ratio, most dinosaurs actually appear to be quite, the smooth brains. No offense to them.
Speaking of smooth brains, have you guys seen a koala brain? Okay, that's random. That's random, but like it's actually so smooth. Like 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 it's just pure. There's nothing. Oh, it has no wrinkles, no folds, no nothing. Thinking is a challenge for them. I mean, I see the correlation of why I thought about that, but it was random.
For example, the 5-ton Stegosaurus only had a brain the size of a walnut, or
Huh?
maybe a bent hot dog.
Okay, I mean, they seem stupid.
While the largest dinosaurs, the sauropods, had brains comparable to tennis balls despite in some cases being 100 tons in weight. Whereas in comparison, our brains are already larger than that, despite being obviously less than 1 ton, besides your mom. And when I say our brains are
Damn.
bigger, I don't mean relatively either. Our noggins are literally about 8 to 10 times bigger than a tennis ball. So a sauropod, probably not the brightest. And so overall, it's generally not thought that these kind of dinosaurs
So like they just live day to day thinking about nothing. Like they live, eat, drink, and poop and do nothing else.
dinosaurs, i.e. ornithischians or sauropods, were as smart as mammals, being generally more comparable to modern reptiles. And in a way this makes sense, as brains require a lot of energy to create and maintain. So in a world where giant killers are after you all the time, and you have to put a bunch of points into size and defenses, suddenly having extreme intelligence doesn't seem to be so important. Plus, when you're something like the Ankylosaurus, i.e. a tank with a club that would give a wrecking ball some insecurities, you really don't need that much thinking power. You see something, you swing. That's it. But even then,
Basic
these
commands.
groups weren't really all that dumb, and some of them, like sauropods or hadrosaurs, did actually utilize stones to a degree, as fossils have been found with something called gastroliths inside their stomach region, meaning they basically gobbled up rocks in order to aid in digestion. But this is more likely an instinctual thing than any sort of intellectual
Yeah.
decision. Now, beyond these two, you then also had, of course, the theropods, the third group of dinosaurs who largely consisted of the carnivorous dinosaurs, and in some cases seem to have gotten far more intelligent than their counterparts, on average possessing larger brains to body size and having more neurons, which is obviously very important. Yet, with that said, just like sauropods and ornithischians, not all theropods are built equal, as within this group, you also had 2 more subgroups, the coelurosaurs and carnosaurs, with the former containing all theropods more closely related to birds than to carnosaurs. And it was these guys, in particular, who were considered to have been the Einsteins of dinosaurs, possessing the highest amount of neurons.
That's
And
a
their level of
stretch.
these cells had become a large part of the dinosaur tool use debate, as not so long ago, a study on one of the best known dinosaurs, of course the king, the Tyrannosaurus rex, showed that based off of an endocast, the king was really packing in neurons, with it being estimated to have had 3,289 of them. And that's in the millions, by the way, giving it not only 10 times the neural power of that of a sauropod like Brachiosaurus, but also more than that of a baboon, who themselves have been
Ooh.
observed using stone tools, such as throwing rocks, or using them to crack open hard-shelled fruits, which in turn has led researchers to claim the T-Rex had what it takes to, at least mentally speaking, to create its own tools to solve
Yeah, but with what hands, brother? With what hands are you doing that?
complex problems, and then get this, build various cultures, especially given that their longevity would have allowed them to live long enough to pass down information.
A T-Rex culture. What do you think their religion would be? Like, like surely a mighty blood god.
From generation to
Probably Gordon
generation.
from
So, T-Rex secret
Warhammer
society
40K.
Now, of course, this study makes some pretty substantial claims, and most other paleontologists had some criticism for it, as possessing a bunch of neurons is, surprise surprise, not actually a guarantee that you're Isaac Newton, as the location of their neurons, their connections, and more all play a role into how this translates into actual intelligence. And in the case of the
Fair.
T-Rex, many think that the high amount of neurons were actually there to supercharge its immensely powerful senses, such as extraordinary smelling, instead of being there for the benefit of creating tools. And really, the T-Rex, or any Tyrannosaur for that matter, weren't exactly the best built to wield stone tools in the first place, seeing that their short arms with regressed digits would have made it quite hard to grasp or manipulate objects, while then their large teeth and giant jaws would also make it hard to pick up and use any type of tool, let alone make them. And because of this, I do think it's quite a stretch to say that any of the Tyrannosaurs were in the Stone Age. Now though, with that said, the Tyrannosaurs were by no means the only theropods out there. And like I said, they are frankly not the best candidate for tool use anyways, as other families had not only better physical traits for potential tool wielding, but also more impressive brains, at least in the sense that they had higher brain-to-body ratios. And this generally extended to the smaller feathered theropods, such as the dromaeosaurs, who could have encephalization quotients as high as 5.8, which puts them on par with predatory mammals such as dogs or house cats, who obviously can also be quite clever when they choose to be. But unlike what you see with the velociraptors in Jurassic Park, this group was likely not door-opening smart, nor are dromaeosaurs considered to be the smartest dinosaurs, as that title belongs to other, usually smaller theropods with even larger brain EQs, such as the Troodontids, Ornithomimidae, and the Archaeopterygidae, with one noticeable trend being that they're more close to a bird of dinosaur.
I mean, to be fair, typically the smaller size you are, like 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 realistically, you can't be huge and smart at the same time. Like like you for like the smartest people, you tend to be on like a shorter scale of things.
Gets, the smarter they seem to be. Across the board, these generally little theropods have some impressively larger brain cavities and EQs compared to their fellow theropods, suggesting they were gifted, you could say, at least within the dino realm. And Troodontids in particular, a group that only showed up in the late Jurassic, have garnered a lot of attention from researchers, as certain genera have shown promising signs of being quite the smarty pants. And there is some real evidence that reflects this and the notion that they were brighter than the rest. As in the North American latent Venatrix, for example, their nests tended to show higher complexities than what other dinosaurs created, with manual manipulation having been observed. Well, then they also used the Earth itself to create their intended designs. Meanwhile, reproductive traces showed a metabolic output extremely similar to that of modern birds, a sign to some at least that they were quite similar in certain ways, thus potentially having a similar level of intelligence. And so these facts, coupled with their more dexterous hands, which included relatively long arms and 3 well-developed digits, has led some to ponder if these guys used rudimentary tools, perhaps even stone tools. In one case, the paleontologist Dale Russell even speculated that if a dinosaur such as the Troodontid, Stenonychosaurus, had not died out in the late Cretaceous extinction, then its descendants might have evolved to be the human equivalent of dinosaurs, leading to the hypothetical species known as the Dinosauroid. Now obviously this was
Ew. Like no. No, this is not play. This is not the play. Like he looks. You ever seen baby fluid? Like when a mother gives birth, he looks like a humanoid version of just that. Give me a second. Okay, my bad, y'all. I had to do something, and my mom needed help, so gotta help.
Met with a lot of scrutiny. But it was an interesting thought experiment that shows just how much smarter paleontologists think troodontids were compared to other theropods. Sadly though, no matter how much more we learn about the actual brain design of dinosaurs, it will always be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to say if any Mesozoic creature had actually been using stone tools. Because as mentioned, if you thought preserving one bone is hard, try preserving good evidence of stone use for many millions of years. However, with all of this said, we can still kind of say that dinosaurs did and do conclusively use stone tools, as one can obviously not forget about the living dinosaurs all around us, birds, who in some ways seem to be the most intelligent of them all. In fact, some birds, such as corvids and parrots, show cognitive properties equal to that of great apes, such as chimpanzees, with one study from Boston University even finding that at least one gray parrot seemed to be as smart as a 6-year-old in at least certain areas. Now obviously, just like dinosaurs, not every bird is Jimmy Neutron, and it does seem that the crows, parrots, and partially vultures are the shining stars, so to speak, of this group, having higher density of neurons in their palliums compared to others. In addition, birds with longer developmental periods and more complex niches have also been shown to have increased intelligence. And across the board, the avian dinosaurs have accomplished some pretty remarkable things, including utilizing various hard surfaces to drop prey onto in order to crack their shells. And what's cool about this is that they're even able to figure out what kind of surface they need depending on the shell they must break. Furthermore, birds have also been recorded using thorns to impale prey.
Bro got put on a hike. Damn. Justice for that rat. That he got the Vladimir treatment. Vlad the Impaler. I mean, I didn't mean to say Vladimir, but close enough.
Pieces of wood as probes, and the list goes on, with studies on tool usage in birds actually being quite intensive and expansive. And essentially the agreement is that they're pretty smart fellas.
Yeah.
With that said, it does beg the question of how do they fare when it comes to stone tools
Oh
specifically?
yeah. Very random interjection here, but like crows remember like people for years. And like if you piss off a crow, it might be crows or ravens, but one of those two. But they will remember you and bring more crows to like gang up on you. It's kind
And
of
the answer to
crazy.
that is, well, remarkably good, as multiple genera have been documented using stones to their advantage. For instance, Trinidadian motmots use stones along forest floors as anvils to crack the shells and exoskeletons of arthropods and snails. And then
That's
perhaps
nice.
more impressively, Egyptian vultures are considered stone tool users as well, seeing that they've learned to equip rocks with their beaks and then use them to hammer open ostrich eggs. And then get this, in crows, we've even observed that they have learned to place stones in various water vessels in order to displace the water and raise the surface level, in order to
Yeah.
make it more accessible to them to drink. And the crow family have actually gotten a bit crazy with this too, as certain species, like many of the ravens, have been noted to use rocks as weapons, dropping them on dogs to make a statement, while also
Just airborne menaces.
having a clear conceptualization on the purpose of man-made tools after they're reused. And this actually plays into a bigger picture, which is that not just ravens, but multiple corvids in general have learned to build tools based off of viewing our own tools, and have then
Ooh.
also taught others of their kind on how to do it as well, passing this information on not only to others in the immediate sense, but also to the next generation.
They're tech stealing. They're reverse engineering. Huh. Never thought I'd say that for a crow.
And it's this transferring of information that scientists view as having been an integral aspect of our very own Stone Age. And then, while not necessarily made out of rock, another big deal with the corvids has been their construction of hooks through twigs that can be used to catch grub. And the reason why this is important is that the invention of hooks is sometimes seen as going hand in hand with our own Stone Age journey once again. And what's crazy is this milestone didn't even actually happen that long ago for us, with barb-edged tools only showing up about 90,000 years ago. In other words, the latter part of modern humans' existence. So, who knows? Maybe dinosaurs are catching up. And something else you could argue is even more crazy about birds is that the exceptionally smart ones are in some cases capable of making tools out of multiple parts, which is a huge step from just fashioning a tool out of one thing, like a
That's
singular
crazy.
twig or a singular stone. And so, when you
I mean, fair multiple part tools are a bit harder.
Combine all of this together, you do find people touting that birds, in their own way, have entered a stone age of sorts, or at least a new, complex technological era. Some have even hypothesized that if great apes were to go extinct, humans included, and birds survived, then maybe it would be their time to create the next civilization, as they also have other factors which are kind of good for this stuff too, like longer lifespans, strong social bonds, behavioral flexibility, complex communication, the ability to problem solve, etc., etc. Of course, though, this is all just experimental thinking, but it would be fun to imagine a world where birds had become the smartest group. But I guess if that were to happen, though, we would never see that day.
Fair enough, but seems like dinosaurs never did enter a stone age. Oh, they could have because using a stone is just considered stone age. But on for our next video, we are watching China's fake J-20 dogfight claim with U.S. jet sparks ridicule.
Recently, China's state broadcaster CCTV aired a special program promoting the J-20. In the footage, a simulated scenario was presented where the J-20 is engaged in a close-range dogfight. CCTV aired a special program promoting the J-20. In the footage, a simulated scenario was presented where the J-20 is
It's just
engaged
like
in a
audio
close-range
issues.
dogfight with foreign aircraft, consistently maintaining the upper hand. Chinese military commentator Zhang Bin analyzed the clip, suggesting the foreign aircraft might be a U.S. Navy FA-18EF carrier-based jet or an F-15C fighter from the U.S. Air Force stationed at Kadena Air Base in Okinawa. The program included a dramatized dialogue between pilots, describing the close-range dogfight between the J-20 and the foreign aircraft.
I'm gonna be honest with you. Isn't like the J-20 just like stolen tech? Like I'm pretty sure it's just like stolen off of the F-22 Raptor. Yes, evidence strongly indicates that the development of China's Chengdu J-20 stealth fighter heavily relied on stolen technology and cyber espionage, targeting American and likely Russian aerospace programs. So I was right. I did remember.
Both jets engaged in tail-chasing maneuvers, testing their agility. Ultimately, the J-20 was depicted as holding the advantage, forcing the foreign aircraft to withdraw. However, CCTV did not provide any concrete evidence proving that the J-20 successfully repelled a foreign aircraft through such a dogfight. According to Taiwanese media outlet New Talk, many Chinese netizens have expressed doubts about the J-20's combat capabilities. One commenter noted
I
that while
do too.
CCTV often reports on
Like sure is probably better than like a prop plane, but again, I still doubt that it can actually fight something.
such aerial encounters involving Chinese and foreign aircraft, it rarely provides veritable footage. In contrast, when foreign aircraft engage with Chinese jets and claim victory, they usually release clear videos, down to details such as PLA pilots flipping the middle finger. Other netizens mocked the situation, sarcastically calling the J-20's combat prowess unbeatable on paper, and ridiculing the CCP for not releasing authentic footage of the incidents. The J-20 is China's fifth-generation stealth fighter. It was developed by the Chengdu Aircraft Industry Group under the Aviation Industry Corporation of China, AVIC. The Eastern Theater Command released a video featuring the J-20, calling it a sea-crossing weapon, with a clear intent to intimidate Taiwan. Chinese social media has also boasted about the J being a formidable rival to the F-35. CCP military expert Fu Qianshao
Hold up. I got something for that one.
claimed rival to the F-35.
Yeah. Yeah. I doubt that. I doubt that very.
CCP military expert Fu Qianshao claimed the primary feature of stealth fighters is their stealth capability, encompassing radar, infrared, optical, and acoustic invisibility. Judging by the J-35A's design, materials, and coatings, I personally believe its stealth performance currently ranks first in the world. Fu further stated that the
Me when I
J-35A's
lie.
high fuel capacity
He got paid to say that. I'm not like I shouldn't doubt him, but I'm doubting him.
allows for longer combat range, faster speeds, and potentially greater altitude for payload capabilities. He also suggested it may outperform rivals in certain aspects of maneuverability. Taiwanese expert Sheng Mingshi stated that the J-20 is on the same level as the American F-22, while the J-35
Now that's a stretch of a lifetime. You're just saying anything.
A matches the F-35. However, neither the J-20 nor the J-35A matches the speed, combat capabilities, or stealth features of the F-22 and F-35. He pointed out that while Israel had effectively used F-35s along F-15s and F-16s to strike targets in Syria, the J-20 and J-35A have no combat record. Based on Japanese and American studies, China's stealth fighters are easily detected by ground-based air defense systems, with actual combat
That's a shame.
capabilities lagging 10 to 15 years behind. Another Taiwanese expert, Oshi Fu, noted that the J-20 lags behind the F-35 in avionics, engines, weapons, and stealth capabilities, although it has seen gradual improvements. He emphasized that the effectiveness of a fighter depends on its intended role. For example, the J-20 is designed to use long-range air-to-air missiles to target early warning and refueling aircraft, so stealth is less critical in its design. Military analyst Shen Zhou observed the J-20 remained the centerpiece of Chinese military promotion, while the J-35 was a new debut. He said the CCP is trying to narrow the gap between its fifth-generation fighters and those of the U.S., but American aircraft still maintain significant air superiority.
Yeah. That's very true. And I'm gonna leave that on that because I'm pretty sure they said at every point. Now let's go to the next video. And I really didn't have much to say on that video anyways. We're watching why Britain's economy is becoming unfixable.
September 14th, 2007. A queue of over 100 people stretches round the corner of the Brighton branch of Northern Rock Bank, Britain's fifth biggest mortgage lender. Just hours earlier, the bank had issued a grave warning. After years of risky borrowing, they were in real risk of running out of cash. What happened next came to define the next few decades. Crowds grew at branches across the country as more and more desperate customers rushed to get their money before it was too late. But by that evening, time was up. Northern Rock had run dry, marking Britain's first bank run in 150 years.
150 years they haven't had a bank run? I know the UK is old, but I didn't know they were that level's old.
In a few months, they were absorbed by the government, never to be seen again. And while this moment may have faded into history, the effects on the UK's economy are impossible to ignore. Since 2008, Britain's economy has never recovered. It's tried austerity, tax cuts, even leaving on the UK's economy are impossible to ignore. Since 2008, Britain.
I mean, to be fair, Britain is just really an island. It's a glorified island for like rich people. And realistically, I don't know what the UK does. Like, sure, they have like a few. They have Aston Martin. I remember that. But like, they fell off after the Empire. After the British Empire, they fell off.
Britain's economy has never recovered. It's tried austerity, tax cuts, even leaving the European Union, but nothing has worked. If the UK had continued to carry on the same trend as before the crisis, average real incomes across Britain would be £52,000, 31% higher than they are today. But instead, year after year, Prime Minister after Prime Minister, Britain has fallen further and further behind its peers. So what went wrong? What happened on that day in 2007 that hit Britain harder than any other country? And more importantly, can it ever recover? Okay, so it's not exactly a secret that the 2008 crisis hit the global economy pretty bad. It bankrupted one of America's oldest banks, set off a debt crisis across Europe, and even single-handedly collapsed the entire economy of Iceland. But in pretty much every single one of these cases,
Single-handedly collapse the entirety. What? Run that back.
Banks set off a debt crisis across Europe, and even single-handedly collapsed the entire economy of Iceland. But in pretty much every single one of these cases, the countries have bounced back, except in the UK. And to understand why, you have to go back to the 1980s and one infamous British leader, Margaret Thatcher.
I'm not gonna lie, she sounds mean. Imagine having a name Margaret Thatcher. You sound old, mean, and unruly.
Time, Britain's economy was just coming out of one of its worst ever decades economically, and Thatcher had already made a number of big decisions to fix this. She boosted interest rates, cut money supply, and most importantly, brought inflation under control. And after a few years, she was making some real progress. And by the mid-1980s, she was ready to go one step further and turn Britain into a global financial superpower. In 1986, Thatcher introduced the now infamous Big Bang deregulation package. She basically ripped up the rulebook, making it cheaper, easier, and faster for anyone in the world to come and do business in London. And on the surface, it worked. International banks poured £450 million into the city, and 1,500 new millionaires were minted. In the roughly 10 years that Thatcher was in charge, Britain's overall economy grew by 40%, from £1 trillion to £1.4 trillion. Now, this is objectively a very impressive thing.
Yes.
And the results spoke for themselves. Between 1980 and 2008, Britain went from being the sick man of Europe to one of its most successful.
The sick man? Wasn't that the Ottoman Empire's title?
Large economies. By
I thought
2005,
that died with them.
the UK had nearly caught up with Germany on GDP per capita and was pulling well ahead of France and Italy. And this wasn't just a Thatcher.
But again, they're a glorified island. I hope they had good GDP per capita. I mean, they don't have much land to deal with.
Thing either. Blair and Brown both came in and kept the model going. However, beneath all of this was a problem. Most of that growth was being captured by a small group of people, primarily in London, and at the expense of the rest of the country. And while finance was booming, many of the industries that the UK had relied upon in the past were being gutted. Manufacturing collapsed from 30% of GDP to just 16%, taking millions of indirect jobs with it, and heavy industry was exactly the same. However, Britain ploughed on.
They still coal mine in the UK.
London was simply making too much money. By 2007, financial services account.
Okay, I know I'm pausing the video a lot, but let's be honest. London is, I mean, the UK is just basically London. When I think of Britain and the UK, I just think of London. You don't think nothing else. But with the United States, you at least think of Los Angeles, Houston, New York, Washington DC, Chicago, if you're from that area.
Accounted for around 9% of UK GDP and roughly 12% of all tax receipts, with the government effectively funding public services off the back of city profits and bonuses. From 1992 onward, Britain enjoyed its longest stretch of economic growth since the Second World War. And this period in particular is looked back upon with nostalgia by many British people, as bands like Oasis and Blur were worldwide hits, and the Cool Britannia movement swept the country. But by the mid-2000s, this period of optimism was coming to an end, and in 2008, the bubble burst, taking the UK and the rest of the world down with it. But while other economies have bounced back, Britain has remained completely stagnant. Broadly speaking, the UK economy has one key issue. It has forgotten how to do anything. It's worth going back to this
Yeah.
chart here, as it perfectly captures the current situation the UK is in. This massive gap between the UK and other countries is primarily driven by one thing: productivity. Since 2008, UK labour productivity has grown by just 4%. In the United States, this is 18%. So, what happened? Productivity is basically just a measure of how much you get done with what you've got. If you've got two coffee shops that both have 5 staff, and one serves twice as many customers, that shop is more productive. And the reason is usually pretty simple. It could be
Yeah.
that it has better equipment, a better layout, or better systems. In other words, it's had more investment. Someone spent money making that shop work better, and that's the thing that Britain has stopped doing. In 2024, the average person was working 4.4% more than in 2019, but producing less. And a big part of the reason goes back to what happened right after the crash. Back then, the UK's public spending had ballooned, and debt was
Okay.
becoming a real problem. And the new government, led by David Cameron and George Osborne's answer was cuts, and lots of them. This meant less spending on things that actually grow the economy. Things like infrastructure, skills, research and development. Things that private firms would need to expand and modernise.
I'm scratching my head because this was the dumbest answer possible. What do you mean you cut education, infrastructure, and research? Um, Hello? Is it? I hope all that money went to debt repayments.
Now, the UK was already chronically underinvesting before the crisis, and this was made even worse with austerity. But it somehow got even worse than that just 6 years later. In a narrow 52-48 vote, Britain decided to leave the European Union and its customs union. Now, this is still a hotly debated topic to this
Yeah.
day, but by most estimates, this has been devastating. GDP has fallen by an estimated 6 to 8%, while the average Brit is roughly £3,000 poorer than they were before. And since then, investment, which remember was already lower than other peers, has fallen off a cliff. The uncomfortable truth is that Britain has become an awful place to invest your money. It's an amazing place
Very.
to hide and clean your money, sure, but an awful place to invest it. But why? What is it about Britain that makes it such a bad bet? Because it's not like the country doesn't have the raw ingredients. It's got world-class universities, a strong legal system, the English language, and a well-educated population. On paper, the
I mean, I'm gonna be honest with you. The English language is overrated. As a natural-born English speaker, and it's the only language I speak, is stupid.
UK should be one of the best places in the world to build a business. The answer is frustratingly simple. Britain just doesn't let you do anything. In the last 5 years,
Huh?
the UK has had a string of different leaders, each with their own unique vision for the country. Boris was going to level up the nation. Liz Truss was going to turn us into a low-tax Singapore on Thames. And
Huh?
Keir Starmer's mission was all about growth. However, none of these grand visions really matter unless the UK fixes a very basic set of problems which have been quietly strangling the economy for decades. And the first is one we've become all too familiar with: housing. To put it simply, the UK has a severe housing shortage.
Again, it's an island.
Britain and France have roughly the same amount of people, and yet France has 7 million more homes. And nowhere is
Huh?
this more apparent than in London. London wages are 14% higher than the rest of the country, but when you account for the inflated cost of living from housing, this advantage drops to just 1%. In fact, London is one of the only major cities where more British people actively leave it every year rather than moving toward it. And
So you're telling me London is less British than other British cities? Huh? You're telling me British people are leaving their capital as other foreign people go into their capital because their own people can't afford housing there. That seems like such an actual
The
problem.
main reason for this is really simple. There aren't enough houses. At the start of his government, Keir Starmer announced a bold plan to fix Britain's housing crisis, promising to build 1.5 million houses in the next 5 years, roughly 300,000 per year. However, 2 years into this government, and the picture is sobering. In the first year of his premiership, Starmer only delivered 208,000 new homes, which was actually 6% fewer than the previous year, and the lowest figure in 8 years. And in the first quarter of 2026, only 32,000 homes were completed, less than half of the 75,000 which would be needed to hit the target. And while it's easy to point fingers at...
I mean, let's be honest, politicians and hitting targets don't go hand in hand. They couldn't hit a target if it was like if they were within I want to say something really close like they couldn't hit a target if they were standing right next to it 1 millimeter apart. It's like them and trying to hit a target is like asking a blind person to throw a stone in a bucket of water.
Starmer. The reason for this crisis goes back decades. Right after the Second World War, Clement Attlee's government basically drew rings around
He
every
kinda looks
major
funny.
city in the country and said you can't build beyond this point. These greenbelts were supposed to protect the countryside, which is valid, but they've
Yeah.
also put a hard cap on how much Britain's most productive cities can grow. The UK now has a shortfall of around 4.3 million homes compared to the rest of Western Europe, and 2/3 of the land identified for potential housing near major cities is ruled out by greenbelt restrictions. And even if you built
mean,
on every single
yeah.
brownfield site in the country, it still wouldn't be enough to hit that 300,000 a year target. This is a problem which has gotten worse over time. Back in 1947, when these rules were invented, it didn't matter as much where you lived, and you could get a decent job in your local area. But as the UK has
That's
grown,
good.
economic opportunities have become more and more clustered in major cities. It's the exact reason tech companies still pay insane rents to be in Silicon Valley, because that's where all the talent and capital are. But Britain's planning system prevents
Yeah.
exactly that kind of clustering from happening, and so the most productive areas cannot physically expand. However, even when houses are built in these major economic centres, actually getting hold of one is another story. In the first quarter of 2024, roughly 27% of all residential property sales in London went to foreign buyers. To put that into
Damn.
perspective, in New York, that very same figure was 0.3%, and
Oh.
now 20% of new rental properties in London now have at least one foreign shareholder, double what it was in 2016. Britain has become a world-class place to park your wealth, but an increasingly difficult place for actual British people to find somewhere to live. Across the UK,
Yeah.
the affordable stock has been sold off and never replaced, and ended up back on the market at prices most people can't afford. And this feeds directly into why the economy can't recover from 2008. If you try and move from the north to London for a better paying job, housing costs eat up almost all of the salary gain, so people just don't bother, and Labour gets trapped in all the wrong places. The most productive cities can't expand, and productivity stagnates. But even if Britain could build enough homes, it would run into another problem pretty quickly, because building anything, houses, factories, even AI data centres, requires energy, and Britain's energy situation has become just as broken. As basic as it seems, energy is the fundamental bedrock of all
Yeah.
economic activity. It is impossible to produce goods, transport materials, or run services without it. There's a reason that energy consumption per capita is one of the strongest things that correlates with national incomes across the world. The more productive a country is, the more energy it uses, and affordable, stable energy costs are essential to growth. For decades, Britain understood this better than almost anyone else. Across its modern history, the UK was able to source and produce cheap energy. And in the late 1970s, North Sea oil turned Britain into one of the world's major petroleum economies almost overnight. And this peaked in 1999. In fact, we actually made a whole video about how Britain made one of its biggest errors, squandering the opportunity, which you can watch somewhere up here. But the point is that
Okay.
energy production in the UK has gone from a major strength to a major weakness. Per capita electricity generation in the UK is just 2/3 of what it is in France, and barely a third
Damn.
of what it is in the United States. In fact, Britain is closer to developing countries like Brazil and South Africa in terms of per capita electricity output than it is to Germany, Japan, or Canada. In the early 2000s, the UK shifted from being a net exporter to a net importer of energy, and the results have been hard to miss. These prices were already on the rise before the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine, but now they're impossible to ignore. Britain now has some of the highest domestic and industrial energy prices amongst developed nations, which is absolutely crippling the economy, essentially
Yeah.
acting as a tax on every single thing the country produces. And it's not like any of this was inevitable either. A proven model of cheap energy has literally been across the channel this entire time. France generates 70% of its electricity from nuclear power, thanks to an aggressive role.
Yeah, but doesn't France get like most of its uranium from like its former colonies at highly discounted rates? Nuclear fuel, but they have historically been major suppliers. Since it imports this uranium from like global markets, with Kazakhstan, Australia, and Namibia being its top suppliers, while Nigeria is significantly historical supplier uh, of uranium. France reliant on these nations have uh, shifted dramatically in recent years. Uh oh yeah, yeah. But it's like ex colonies doesn't really like it anymore.
Rollout that began in the 1970s, and nuclear doesn't suffer from the same intermittency problems that wind and solar face,
Yeah.
meaning you need more expensive storage and backup fossil fuel generations, which drives up costs significantly. The result for them is abundant, cheap, and low carbon energy, which Britain had every opportunity to do so and simply chose not to. So, businesses are
Again, I'm gonna say this. Like I get people don't like nuclear power plants. I really do. But it's way better and way cleaner than anything fossil fuel or like coal would ever produce. And nuclear power plants, like in nuclear power plants, I forgot what I was gonna say, but they produce way less active, like highly radioactive, like waste material than you would actually think. Speaking on that, it's like most of the fuel gets reused, and then even when you have that like 10% of waste fuel you cannot use, it still gets like put deep within concrete and like just underground, and it takes up way less area.
already paying more for energy than almost any other developed country. And you'd think that if everything else was stacked against you, the government would at least make it worth your while to try. But instead, Britain has done the opposite. Since 2008, the UK tax burden has risen almost continuously, and it's now at
Damn.
the highest level since the 1940s. However, it's the way that Britain taxes that's even more damaging than how much it taxes. In the US, in order to hit the top marginal income tax rate, you'd need to be earning 8.5 times the average wage. In the UK, it's just 3.5 times, making it not just a tax on the rich, but on anyone who's doing reasonably well. Senior teachers, mid-career engineers, and small business owners, essentially
Damn.
anyone aspirational. The UK is also aging faster than the US, and the people who
I mean,
respond
yeah,
most to
because
these tax
the
increases are
UK
older
is
workers,
old.
as they could simply just retire. So Britain is simultaneously facing a demographic crunch where it desperately needs.
Speaking of which, didn't the president of France recently get into hot water because he wanted to raise the age of retirement?
People to stay in the workforce, while taxing them to the point that there isn't much reason to do so. This is all made worse when you consider where this money is actually being spent. Since the pandemic, spending on sickness benefits have nearly doubled, rising to over £50 billion a year. The simple fact is if that Britain wants to have a large welfare state, it needs an extremely capitalist private economy to pay for it. The result of all of this is that a huge number of young productive people are starting to leave the country, going to Australia, Dubai, Singapore, basically anywhere that doesn't punish them for doing well. So, what can the UK actually do about this? In May 2026, Tony Blair, the former leader of the UK for 10 years, published an essay detailing what he thought the issue with Britain was. Blair's central argument is that Britain's problem isn't personality, communication, or even specific policies. It's the absence of any coherent strategy for a fast-changing world. And despite all the negativity, there are a couple of real growth areas for the UK. The result of that is that even the areas where the UK should have a real shot for generating economic growth often end up failing to do so. Artificial intelligence is about to reshape the global economy in ways in which we can't probably fully comprehend yet. And Britain, almost despite itself, is actually well positioned for this. DeepMind, arguably the most important AI research lab in the world, is based in London. The UK has 4 of the world's top 10 universities and has Europe's largest tech ecosystem and a time zone that bridges America and Asian markets. The problem is, AI needs a huge amount of cheap energy to function, something which the UK doesn't have. And even if the country wanted to massively invest in developing new energy sources like solar or nuclear, the planning system would make this practically impossible. Without fixing the basics, leveraging technology like AI becomes practically impossible, regardless of how good a country's universities are. To have any chance of fixing this, it would require a load of major reforms to lots of different things at once. Planning, capital markets, infrastructure investment, tax rates. But the problem that Blair outlined in his essay is that, well, nobody seems that interested in trying to do this. If Keir Starmer is replaced in the next few months, the country will move on to its 7th Prime Minister in just 10 years. With leaders holding office for such a short amount of time, they never really have the chance to develop an actual plan for how to change the country, much less implement it. Rather than making the hard choices that are sometimes needed, successive governments have just kind of muddled through, hoping the problem would resolve itself. The cruel irony is that,
again, just kicking that can down the road
that Britain
for
actually
the next
knows
generation.
what it needs to do. There's a pretty broad consensus as to what needs to happen across most sides of the political spectrum. Actually being able to get those things done, though, is another question altogether. Okay, on a bit of a separate note, on May 31st, President Trump posted "Time to audit Fort Knox," the most direct signal yet that sovereign hard assets are back at the center of the global conversation. And yet, gold has fallen for 3 consecutive months since hitting all-time highs in Q1. Gold stock indices are actually in the red for this year, and investors who were piling in at the peak are now quietly closing positions. But this is exactly why you should be paying attention. Warren Buffett's most famous rule was be careful when others are greedy, and greedy when others are careful. The president is auditing Fort Knox. The ECB has just announced that gold has surpassed treasuries as the most held reserve asset by central banks. The macro case has never been stronger, and yet the sentiment has never been more bearish. The sponsor of today's video is Canadian Goldfields Discovery. Ticker
I'm just gonna leave that out. Let's move on to another video. Speaking
Last
of
week,
which,
Google announced that
we're gonna do like one more after this, maybe, and we're gonna call it quits. Let's get into it.
Google announced that it wanted to raise almost $85 billion by selling stock. In this day and age, it's hard to understand how much money $85 billion is, but the largest IPO in history of the American stock exchanges was Alibaba. It was $22 billion. So this is like almost 4 times as much as that, which is not on its face a problem. I mean, Google is very valuable. Google does a lot of buying its own stock back to raise the price of its stock, and now it's doing the opposite of that, making it available for sale. People are going to be able to buy it, and people will, and that's really interesting for a few different reasons. One is that this is Google. The Alphabet is one of the richest companies in the world. They make a lot of money, tens of billions of dollars in profit per year. Some of it getting thrown off of this very YouTube video right now. You know, we're doing it, everybody. Why would Google, one of the most profitable, largest companies of all time, need to sell stock to raise money? And the answer is, of course, AI. All of the AI stuff is expensive, the chips in the data centers, and the power and the lobbyists. But that's the official, simple answer. There's also a less official answer that is speculated by a lot of people, which makes this all very interesting and outlines the title of the video. SpaceX is about to go public. It's about to make shares of itself available for the public to...
I mean, hasn't it been public? Hold on, I can check this. Give me a second. I'm pretty sure it's public. Give me a second. If it would load faster. Yeah, it's public. It's up 15% on the day. Yeah, it's just waiting on getting listed on, like, I forgot the indices. Yeah, those ones.
buy in an initial public offering, or IPO. It's going to sell $75 billion of shares, is the idea. Anthropic also has filed to go public. It's going to sell another something like that. OpenAI is probably also going to have its IPO this year. They probably feel like they're coming in a little late. Depending on how you count the upcoming offerings and private rounds, investors may soon be asked to put like hundreds of billions of dollars of new money into AI companies. And these are all AI companies. We're talking about SpaceX, but SpaceX is now an AI company. It's merged with XAI. I don't know how any of this was allowed, but it was. Here we are. But the important thing...
Very soft lawmakers. Very soft.
Here that like people who think about investments think about, but nobody else does, is that this is new money. And that's very different from how the stock market works day to day. On a normal day, when stock goes up or down, the company is not raising money. The existing shares are just being traded between investors, and one person sells and another one buys. And based on how much someone wants to sell and how much someone wants to buy, the price that they will agree on will become the new market price. And everybody's shares, without anybody else making a trade, will become worth that new market price. So you buy $100 of Google stock. Tomorrow, somebody is like, actually, I'd pay 5% more for that. Now you have $105 of Google stock. You didn't do anything. Nobody bought anything from you, but now you have more money. And that goes up and up and down and down. And that's how the stock market works. If 1 billion people all owned Google stock for $100 a share and nobody wanted to sell any for less than 200, and somebody was willing to pay 200, then all of those people would suddenly have twice as much net worth. Of course, actually, lots of people are always willing to buy and sell at various prices. So, you know, one person buying doesn't actually inflate the price of a stock, but theoretically it could. If nobody wanted to sell, then that would make it go up, which is a little bit what happens in the private market with companies like Anthropic and OpenAI. People can't really sell, they can only buy. And perhaps this is useful to keep in your head, but if you take the price that the highest bidder is willing to pay and you multiply that by every share that a company has, that will give you the company's market cap. That's how much it's worth. If Google has 1 billion shares and one share trades for $100, we say that the company is worth $100 billion. But $100 billion did not enter the company. $100 billion did not even necessarily enter the market. The whole company was repriced based on that one marginal trade. This is why stock market valuations can move super violently. A small number of shares trading at higher prices or lower prices, that can revalue the...
Honestly, that's what gets me when people say like trillions of dollars were wiped from the market. Like, there was no trillions of dollars in the market at the first place. It's just it's just a company's evaluation, not that they actually had trillions of dollars and they just burned it.
the entire company. The issuance of new stock is a totally different thing from this. If a company sells $75 billion of new stock, somebody has to buy all 75 billion, not one person, but people, institutions and people have to buy $75 billion of new stock. All of that money has to be traded. It can't just be like one share affecting the price. All of that has to be new money entering the system. And so finally, like, this is kind of the moment, the most dangerous moment so far, in which AI has to prove that it is actually worth itself. So for the last few years,
Honestly,
the AI trade
I'm
has
just
mostly
going to
been
try to
about
profit
belief, like
before
investors, I think,
it pops.
do believe that AI will be huge. And so existing AI-linked stocks have gone up in the public market, you know, Nvidia, Microsoft, Google, all going up. Private companies at the same time have raised money at enormous valuations. So OpenAI, Anthropic, SpaceX, CoreWeave, XAI, they're all taking money, and they're actually, this is new money coming into them. When they raise money from the private market, people are giving them money, and these companies have become a giant story about the future. And even if you're not invested, I'm invested, but only through index funds. Even if you're not invested, oh God, a lot of the economy seems to be based on this giant story about the future. And now that story is going to ask for a lot of real cash. So Google wants 85 billion, SpaceX wants 75 billion, Anthropic has already raised privately 65 billion, is preparing for offering the public market. That's going to be tens of billions. OpenAI, also tens of billions. And these are not normal IPO numbers. Like, the entire public offering market last year raised $44 billion. The biggest year in the US of all times of IPOs was about 142 billion. That was 2021, when we were going crazy with the SPACs. So when people start talking about 300 billion, 350 billion, 400 billion of AI related equity supply, like need for new dollars, that is a huge amount of money that needs to come from somewhere. And that's not a question of whether or not investors like AI. I really do think they like AI. The question is whether they have enough cash to buy all of this stock at these prices. And if they don't have enough cash, maybe they still want to buy, but in order to do that, they have to sell something. Maybe they sell Nvidia, maybe they sell Tesla, maybe they sell Microsoft or Apple or Google itself. Maybe they sell index funds or something really boring, like they pull money out of money markets, but the money does have to come from somewhere, and it's a lot of money. I don't know how much money is sitting around out there, but 400 billion is a lot. And this all brings me back to Google suddenly, to me anyway, appearing out of nowhere and making what is probably an extraordinarily savvy move. Google does not want to pop the AI bubble. Google benefits massively from the AI bubble. They want the AI bubble to continue to exist. But at the same time, they want safety from the AI bubble. And they may have noticed that investor capital is finite. If investors are willing to pay enormous prices to be exposed to AI, Google can say, hey, you get exposure through us, and also you get like a safe, great, obviously well-run company that has a lot of different sources of income. We're already public, we're already profitable, we already have users, we already have distribution, we have data centers, we build data centers, we are even working on custom chips. If AI disappoints and everything crashes, we've still got YouTube, baby. So it's not Google like trying to pop the bubble, but Google is trying to raise money while the bubble still exists. And also by offering a bunch of new Google stock, it's going to sop up a bunch of money that might have otherwise gone to other AI companies. If Google absorbs $85 billion of AI investor demand, that money can't go to SpaceX or Anthropic or OpenAI or anybody else. And maybe market demand is strong and confidence is high and every offering will totally sell 100% and then more and all the stock prices will go up. But Google obviously could have waited for SpaceX to happen, waited for Anthropic to happen, but they didn't. They wanted to be first. A bubble can survive super high valuations for a very long time. As they say, the market can stay irrational for longer than you can stay liquid. And that can make it hard to make bubbles difficult to identify in real time. And like, I always remember that in 1999, everybody said it was a bubble for like 2 years. And then as soon as people started saying, I mean, maybe it's not a bubble, that's when, but like, that's just vibes. Bubbles are difficult to identify. You know, like tulips and Bitcoin are one thing. But in terms of like the big bubbles, there's usually real value, like railroads, the internet, broadband infrastructure. There's definitely overinvestment, but the underlying technology really did change the world. It really was a big new business opportunity. The existence of a bubble does not mean technology is fake, but it does mean that investors are paying too much too soon. which happens like basically every time there's a big new technology like
Fair.
railroads or like the internet. I think this is
I mean, yeah, but honestly, I'm gonna say something kind of crazy. Bubbles, tech bubbles, like railroads, internet, broadband, like the stuff you say, are needed. They're needed because they push the technology to its breaking point and seeing how much value can realistically be gained from something. So I think they're necessary. Actually, most likely welcome because even when it pops, it does leave something behind, and what's going to be left behind is AI models that are going to, well, improve productivity and just efficiency. They're not going to take over humanity, but they're just going to improve our lives.
why so many people are comfortable acknowledging that AI looks really bubbly while remaining bullish on AI. They can imagine a future where AI becomes enormously valuable, and they can imagine that today's spending will eventually be justified. What will happen between now and then? Will it just be like a straight line that always goes up? It would
No.
be if capital is always available and prices keep rising. But it seems to me that bubbles don't end because everyone suddenly decides that there's actually no value or the story was wrong. They end when the cost gets so high that it's hard to hold on to the confidence that everyone had for so long. So really, what pops a bubble is cost, is how much it costs to keep inflating it, and whether confidence continues to inflate along with cost.
But we already invested more money than the economy like 15 years ago. I'm pretty sure.
It seems like eventually the cost gets too high and the confidence isn't like saying, no, AI will never happen and never be valuable. What the confidence is saying is like, oh, that's too much, too rich for my blood. You're actually asking for real money now, and I'd rather sort of wait and see for 6 months. When investors believe that there will always be another buyer, valuations can totally keep climbing. A stock can double and then double again because each new buyer is just assuming that someone else will eventually pay even more. The system is just feeding on the confidence. And so far, if you look back, you're like, man, I wish I'd been more exposed. I wish I'd had more cash in that. But when I say that this is like the most dangerous moment for the AI bubble, this is when the confidence has to be converted into cash. And Google getting in first, like working to get in first, has the feeling of like needing to move fast. And that need to me seems a little like just in case the actual movement of actual capital puts a dent in people's confidence. And there has been need for capital before. Like OpenAI and Anthropic and SpaceX have all raised tens of billions of dollars. New money from private markets. So the money has existed, but all of that money is oriented toward the eventual goal of being able to sell.
Yeah, but like now they're trying to get like the money of like old retirement funds.
And not all of the investors are going to be able to sell immediately. Most of them won't. They'll have to hold on to it for a certain amount of time. But if you bought $100,000 of Anthropic stock 3 years ago, you got like super lucky and you did that, and now it's worth $6 million, and that's like 3/4 of your net worth, you're going to want to sell a big chunk of that as fast as you can just to diversify. So that's other money that's going to have to come into the market. In the private market, all of these investors are trying to get in before the IPO. At the IPO, everything has to get really real. And while the revenue story at Anthropic does look better than I would have guessed that it would have at this moment, this is all very new. And I think a few cold feet could really mess this up if like people start to shift from that confidence to caution.
I mean, I really do understand what he's saying. And like, again, if I do end up getting money, I'm probably gonna invest in it myself. But yet again, I'm just gonna like, the moment I see pullback, I'm just gonna leave it because like I'm willing to gamble, but I'm not willing to like lose my life gambling. That is a crazy way to end off a stream. But I will see you guys next week, as this is a weekly stream. Thank you all, and let me